Usually when an artist releases an album, they try to market it and create hype in a way that gets listeners excited to hear all of the sounds that are on that album. Like when Kanye did the Donda release concerts, or when Drake was putting up billboards before he dissed Kendrick back. These moments were exciting. But U2 is a band that had probably one of the worst marketing ideas possible for one of their albums. So bad that it's often labeled one of the worst releases of all time. And here is how it went down. U2 is an Irish rock band that found major success in the 80s. Eventually they went on to become some of the best-selling artists ever, have one of the best-selling albums ever, and have one of the highest amounts of RIAA certifications. Those are just the gold and platinum plaques, all that sort of stuff. U2 was extremely successful even into the 2000s and 2010s, and it was in the 2000s that they began to form a good relationship with the company Apple. Bono, the lead singer of U2, was a big fan of the iPod, and Steve Jobs was a big fan of U2. So they became friends, and as Jobs said in his autobiography, they offered to do a commercial for Apple entirely for free. Of course, in turn, they were getting to promote their music, so it was a win-win. But then Bono asked if they could get their own iPod, to which Steve obliged, and then in 2004, they released a U2-themed iPod. Apple, along with many other companies, has also worked with Bono for his product Red in an attempt to raise money and awareness to eliminate AIDS from African countries.
I just realized this too, but if you have a red iPhone or iPod and you look at the back, on the bottom it should say product in parentheses. That's because of Bono.
Apparently, Steve Jobs and Bono and their families would vacation together, so I guess they were really good friends. And it turns out that the old artist symbol from iTunes back in the day was actually Bono.
This is the crazy thing. I did not know this till this afternoon, that your association with iTunes goes back quite a long way.
Yes.
So, you know at the bottom in your iTunes, there's those little symbols, like there's music, there's artists, there's more, whatever. The symbol for artists, that's Bono.
So clearly Apple and U2 had a very good relationship. By the year 2014 though, music was in a weird spot. The age of CDs was coming to a close as illegal websites like LimeWire and Napster started to pick up, making it easier for people to just download songs online. Then iTunes came out, and you could buy songs for like $1.29 or an album for I think like $11. They would be right on your phone or iPod, which was extremely convenient. However, by 2014, Spotify was on the rise and streaming was about ready to take over. However, iTunes still had the majority market share when it came to listening to music digitally, so it was a pretty big deal at the time. And in 2014, they had about 500 million users, which, if my calculations are correct, is like 7% of the Earth's population. Or it was at the time. So with the fear that Spotify was about to dominate the industry, which they ended up doing anyways, and because of how successful iTunes was at the time, U2 leveraged their past relationship with Apple and brokered a deal. U2 had been working on an album called Songs of Innocence. Bono has mentioned before that he was uncertain that the band would be able to remain relevant, which may have had a hand in the decisions that were to be made. On the flip side, like I said, Apple wanted to keep iTunes relevant as Spotify was on the come up. So instead of doing something like an iTunes exclusive release, Apple and U2 planned something a bit more stupid, to put it plainly. Apple and Tim Cook worked out a deal with U2 to where they would purchase the album for $100 million from U2, and in exchange, Apple would send out the album to every single iTunes user's library. They had an exclusive release 5-week window, and they all thought this was a great idea, until, however, it wasn't. On September 9th of 2014, Apple had their annual event where they talk about all of their plans, their new products, and things along those lines. They announced the iPhone 6, which is always a big deal. They also announced the launch of the first ever Apple Watch, but they also went live with their U2 collaboration. U2 was invited out onto the stage to perform a brief concert for everyone at the event.
That was the most, wasn't that the most incredible single you've ever heard? We would love a whole album of that.
Then they transitioned to announcing that U2's album, Songs of Innocence, would be made free for every single iTunes user.
As of this time last week, we finished our album. It's called Songs of Innocence. We're very excited about it. The question is now, how do we get it to as many people as possible? Because that's what our band is all about.
Wait, are we the very first people to see this in the world?
Yes. And I think you can help us. How do we get this to as many people as possible?
Well, you know, we do have iTunes.
I do believe you have over 500 million subscribers to iTunes, so could you get this to them?
Sure, we could do that.
Could you, like, do it in, like, 5 seconds just by pressing a sort of magic Apple send button? You could do that?
If we gave it away for free,
But first you would have to pay for it. You would consider putting Songs of Innocence out to over 500 million people free in, say, 5 seconds from now.
yes. We press the button, it'll take a little longer to get all the way across the internet, but it can start in 5 seconds.
Aside from the kind of cringy acting, they announced with this weird countdown where they touched fingertips on one that every iTunes user now had access to their album Songs of Innocence. The album was sent out to 500 million people that had iTunes accounts, and it was automatically downloaded to everyone's phones if you had automatic downloads turned on, which a lot of people did. They claimed that it was the largest album release of all time. Again though, this was back in 2014, where most people probably had like iPhone 5s, which had a max capacity of 64 gigabytes, or an iPod with the max storage of 16 gigabytes. Although I am willing to bet that a majority of people back then had 8 gigabyte storage. So most people didn't have a lot of storage, and as I'm sure you can imagine, they weren't too happy to find out a album was just automatically downloaded on their phone. But couldn't they just delete it to free up space? Like, why is this such a big deal? Well, no, you actually could not delete the album. There was an option to hide the album, but there was actually no way to delete or uninstall the album from your phone or iPod. It got to the point where people were making tutorials on YouTube to teach people how to delete the album. Eventually, Apple made it easier to actually delete the album after they got a ton of backlash. About a week later, Apple put out this separate tool or this web page you could go to that you could use to delete it, but they also warned you that once you deleted it, you wouldn't be able to get it back. I'm also pretty sure it just didn't work for a lot of people. And it's safe to say most fans were not happy about this situation. Apart from a handful of U2 fans, most people were pretty angry. Apple had later released a report that said 33 million people had listened to at least one song from the album, which is only 6.7% of the 500 million iTunes users. Many fans and even artists were very vocal on Twitter about what happened. Sharon Osbourne said, "Jimmy Iovine, iTunes, U2, you're a bunch of megalomaniacs, f*** you." Even Tyler the Creator was pissed off, saying, "Get off my f***ing phone, you couldn't come up with an actual marketing idea? F*** you, U2, I don't want you. Bono, I didn't ask for you, I'm mad." Others said things like, "Hi Tim Cook, my iPhone has a virus called U2, how do I uninstall it? Apple owes me a new iPhone because I had to purify this one with fire after finding a U2 album on it." I'm gonna be completely honest, when I was a kid I had no money for iTunes or anything, so I didn't mind a free album, but I can totally get why others were upset. The backlash was actually so strong that one publication even labeled U2 the most hated band in America. The whole situation even caused the sales of all of their other albums to drop as well. Their producer Flood tried to defend them, saying that this raises a larger question or issue of actually owning music, which honestly was kind of ahead of its time because streaming hadn't even fully taken over yet, but it was an interesting point. And on top of all of this, the album just wasn't that good. Of course, this is pretty subjective and the album got a lot of mixed reviews, but I think the general consensus is that it was just pretty mid. Right away, they were asked about the backlash, and Bono gave his thoughts immediately.
There has been criticism over the last 10 days, quite a bit of criticism, just the way it was done.
Really?
Are you?
Wouldn't I have heard about this? Wouldn't people have complained online or something?
In fact, that's the funny thing, actually, that's very important about going online. 85% of people who go online to complain.
Look, the same people who used to write on toilet walls when we were kids are now in the blogosphere. The blogosphere is enough to put you off democracy. But no, let people have their say, why not? But yeah, they're the haters, we're the lovers, we're never going to agree. Look, it worked, and the only thing was this technological blip, which was some people, it didn't just stay in the cloud, it hopped into their phone. Apple are very sorry about that. They've sent people away to delete it. It's one click. I mean, really, come on.
In later interviews, the band members just kind of joked about it and played it off like it wasn't really a big deal. They also came up with a bit of a sappy reason as to why they wanted to get the album to everyone so that as many people as possible could hear their art. But you'll also notice that they always mention the fact that Apple just paid them a buttload of money for the album, which was most definitely a motivator.
We worked very hard on these songs and we really believed in them, but we were scared they wouldn't, people wouldn't hear them, or it's tricky these days, to be heard. And we've been around a while. Why would anyone want another U2 album? We kind of asked ourselves that question. And it turns out Some people don't believe in Father Christmas.
No, I cared in as much as I knew that if we put it out the normal way, you know, records don't stay around the way they used to a few years ago. And these songs, I think, are like they're some of the best songs we've ever written, and to get them out this way digitally, it wasn't exactly a revolution, but we thought if we went to Apple, we would at least get paid, and Apple would give them free to their customers, which we thought was a good idea.
I mean, think about it. Rather than spending a ton of money on marketing and, you know, risking this big budget to produce the album, and you're not sure if you're going to fully make the money back, they didn't have to do that because they had a guaranteed $100 million. Plus, eventually they ended up releasing the album normally anyway. Apple had locked in a 5-week exclusive window for their release, and then the album was released normally. The physical releases had 4 bonus tracks to make it a bit of a better deal so that people had more motivation to buy it, since most people probably already had it. And these were also exclusive to brick and mortar stores for 5 weeks. When the album finally hit the charts, it sold 16,000 copies first week in the UK and 28K in the United States. So it didn't do all that bad, but who's to say it would have made them back 100 mil. Eventually, despite them playing it off at first, it does seem like Bono and the rest of the band realized that they had made a mistake. In a Facebook Q&A, someone asked Bono to never release an album that way again, and he responded, "Oops, I'm sorry about that. I had this beautiful idea. Might have got carried away with ourselves." Artists are prone to that kind of thing. A drop of megalomania, a touch of generosity, a dash of self-promotion, and deep fear that these songs that we poured our life into over the last few years might not be heard. There's a lot of noise out there. I guess we got a little noisy ourselves to get through it. Again, you'll notice that sappy, we put so much work into this, we just wanted you guys to hear it, and I'm not sure if I'm buying it, to be completely honest. Regardless, this release would continue to haunt them for years, with some claiming that it destroyed the band's already decaying legacy. Bono later said in his autobiography that he regretted how they handled the situation. "I take full responsibility. Not Guy O, not Edge, not Adam, not Tim Cook, not Eddie Q. I'd thought if we could just put our music within reach of people, they might choose to reach out toward it. Not quite. As one social media wisecracker put it, woke up this morning to find Bono in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, wearing my dressing gown,
Reading my paper.
or less kind, this free U2 album is overpriced." He also added in an interview once that at first he thought it was just internet drama and that it wasn't a big deal, but then he realized that they had bumped into a serious discussion about the access of big tech to our lives. And like I said, just because of how invasive, annoying, obnoxious, and just ridiculous this release was, for many it has gone down as the worst album release in music history. One person on Reddit said, "I know it's been said before, but it cannot be understated that U2's Songs of Innocence is a historical bomb. It's one thing to piss off people who like your music, but it's a whole other catastrophe to piss off people who don't. If they simply just made it free without sending it to every iTunes user's library, it would have been a whole lot different. If they just put out some sort of ad and said, hey, you can have this for free if you want it, I'm sure everybody would have loved that. But instead, the invasiveness and the automatic downloads caused a lot of problems for Apple, the band, and the fans at home. If you like this video, you might like my video on Beats by Dre, which is a similar time period sort of thing where I'm talking about what happened to the brand. Anyway, though, if you enjoyed, please make sure to leave a like and even consider subscribing down below. Other than that, it's been your boy Matty Balls, and I'll see you guys next time.